Hey folks, I'm actually recording this Monday afternoon. So rather than taking a bunch of your questions and rather than getting a chance to say hello to you from wherever you are, I thought I'd give you a bit of a wrap up of where we are because quite astonishingly, to me anyway, is that President Donald Trump's disastrous speech to Davos, to the World Economic Forum at Davos, was less than a week ago. Time, we're in one of those periods where things are changing so incredibly quickly. It's just impossible. I wouldn't say it's hard to catch up. It is impossible to keep up with what is going on. So I wanted to start back there with that. That speech at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, was January 21st. If you remember, it was very long, it was rambling, it was very aggressive, it was very offensive to the people that were there. And crucially in it, he insisted that the United States must have Denmark, must own, I'm sorry, not Denmark, must own Greenland, which is an autonomous island in the Kingdom of Denmark, in order for the United States and for the world to be secure. I mean, this was a must-have. Everybody, had to step back while the United States of America took Greenland. Well, what happened after that? I mean, that was less than a week ago. And yet what happened on the heels of that is that the stock market began to crater. And there was a period in which it looked as if people were going to dump American financial products because of their concerns about the way that the American government was behaving. And so all of a sudden, Trump did an about face. He said, I've talked to the leaders of Denmark and Greenland, and we've got an agreement. It's going to be great for everybody. I'll tell you about it in 2 weeks. And that's it. Greenland dropped off the face of the map. All of that dropped off the face of the map. And I wanted to emphasize that today because you have to always have in the forefront of your mind when you're thinking about American politics today that we are dealing with a president who is not at the top of his mental game. He is seemingly pushing stories, mythologies that are in his head right up until there is significant pushback. And then he just declares that he has won and moves on. And I wanted to have that set up there, which again, my mind remains blown that all happened less than a freaking week ago, and all the crisis over NATO that came out of that, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, and so on. It seems like it was from another lifetime, and yet it was less than a week ago, because that was Trump's speech was January 21st, and on Saturday, January 24th, what appeared to have been federal agents from Customs and Border Patrol killed Alex Preddy, an ICU nurse for the VA in Minneapolis, Minnesota, that morning at about 9:05 that morning. And boy, has the world changed even more since that happened. Because what came out of that event, that killing, is a number of things. But first, to take a look at what happened with the Trump administration immediately before there was any kind of an investigation or anything. And mind you, the agents involved in that shooting simply walked away. There was no attempt by them to preserve the crime scene. The people who were there did try and do it by, for one thing, blocking it off with trash bins, which I'm going to come back to because what has happened in Minnesota is very important as well. But immediately, the Trump administration, officials led by Kristi Noem, the Secretary of Homeland Security, and Greg Bovino, one of the directors of Customs and Border Patrol, came out to the cameras and blamed the victim for the shooting that had taken his life. And they began to smear him, much in the same way that they smeared Renee Good when agents took her life earlier in the operation that the administration has launched against Minneapolis. And they did so even though there were increasing numbers of video out about the Preddy killing, as there had been about the Good killing. And that is, they seem to be trying simply to get out their version of what happened immediately with the hope that that would at least salt enough disinformation among their base that they would retain the loyalty of that base, so that even though the rest of us would look at the videos and say, well, that's not actually what happened, the base would continue to insist that whatever their leaders had said was true. So in the case of Renee Good, there have been so many videos out now, it is established completely that no, she did not use her car as a weapon. No, the agent who shot her, Jonathan Ross, was not ever touched by the car. Those things are established now. There have been frame by frame analyses of independent journalists from a number of sites saying, you know, here you see for yourself, this is not what happened. But there are still MAGA people who insist that, in fact, she was using her car as a weapon to hurt the police officer that was, I'm sorry, the federal agent who was standing in front of her. And now, of course, an independent autopsy has also shown that it certainly appears as if the killing shot that took the life of Renee Good was the third shot that Ross fired through the open window into the side of her head. Now, those are all established, but again, having been able to create a narrative that enough people believe to shore up their MAGA base seemed at least enough to work, that when there was another killing on Saturday of, again, an observer of what was going on, immediately they came out and said that he had been standing in the way of an operation, and that he had threatened the federal agents. And as soon as it became known that Preddy had a gun tucked into the back of his waistband, he had a license to carry a gun, and he was doing so because he was one of those people out there who were sort of patrolling to protect people in Minneapolis. Then the story got even more extreme, in which people like Kristi Noem said that he was intending to massacre police officers and bystanders. And that was just simply false. Now, they got out there immediately, as I say, and within a very short amount of time, but certainly within hours, a whole number of different videos from different vantage points proved all that was a lie, proved overwhelmingly that it was a lie. And there was something really interesting that happened there, because there are two things. One, the man who was killed by the federal officers, and mind you, I haven't a name there. That we know there were two federal officers who fired 10 shots in total. We don't know the names there because the Greg Bovino and the officials from the White House are saying they will not release those names, which is deeply troubling because of the idea of accountability of those members of our society who are licensed by the state to be able to exercise violence. One of the reasons that they are supposed to identify themselves and so on is that is supposed to be transparent. But in any case, when you think about that killing, what it did was a number of things. First of all, it is very clear from the videos that Alex Preddy was trying to protect a woman that an ICE agent, a federal agent. I've made the distinction before between ICE agents and Border Patrol agents. And in this case, it does appear it was Border Patrol that created this scene. They are much more aggressive than even ICE agents, and they have been overseen in that aggression by Greg Bovino. In any case, one of them had come across the road and violently shoved to the ground a woman who was filming him. And Preddy in the videos turns to help her up. And as he does that, another agent shoots pepper spray in his face, and then they pull him down from behind, and then they shoot him and then empty 10 rounds into his body. That what that did to the American psyche is important for a number of reasons. The one that jumps out, not the most important, I'm making sort of a political argument here. What is most important is that a human life was taken by the American state. And that loss of that life to his family and his friends and his community and to our nation is obviously the biggest issue here. But the issue of what that is going to do to the United States of America is also an issue. And one of the things that is important is that Mr. Preddy had a license to carry a gun. He did not pull the gun, he did not brandish the gun, but the state began to use that. The federal government began to say, well, if you come out in public to a protest carrying a gun, you're going to get shot or you're going to deserve whatever happens. Now, if you think about the construction of those people in the MAGA movement, many of them have been arguing what they would call Second Amendment rights for a very, very long time now. And they have insisted that they need their guns to push back against an overweening state, a government that is trying to make them wear a mask, for example, or trying to make them get a vaccine, or trying to do something that they feel is an invasion of their personal rights. And here now you have White House officials saying, well, he was carrying a gun. Of course we were going to shoot him. And that was a really big mistake on the part of the myth making of people like Greg Bovino and Kristi Noem, because an awful lot of MAGA people, including gun owners organizations, came forward and said, now hang on just a minute here. The other thing that mattered, and God, I hate this, but the other thing that mattered is that the man who was killed was a white man holding a gun. And an awful lot of people who could look at all of the Black and brown Americans who have been hurt so freaking badly by this administration, or could look even at the killing of a white mother and say, they'll never come for me. Watch them shoot a white man and said, hang on, they've gone too far. I hate that that's the way it is. And I just don't even start me down that rabbit hole, but it is an important consideration here, because almost immediately two things happened. First of all, the administration really kind of floundered. I mean, it was very clear that Kristi Noem was lying. It was just very clear that she was lying. And this is an administration that has managed to pull together its support for a very long time by putting forward stories that weren't true. They're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats, all that crap. But in those cases, there weren't cameras there proving a negative, if you will. In this case, as the administration has continued to lie, we have all these videos that prove that they are lying. And at some point, a number of people who have been supporting the administration are like, you just can't keep this up. We're looking at you and you're lying, and we know you're lying. And, on today, which is Monday, as I say, as I'm recording this, there's an article out in the New York Times talking about how federal agents are feeling in this moment and talking about how demoralized they are and so on. And there's actually a federal immigration agent who says, I don't trust anything they're doing anymore. I don't trust them at all. I used to trust them in everything. I can't trust them anymore. That's not a direct quote, by the way. I'm paraphrasing it. But the point is that there was a huge break over what the administration was selling and what the American people were willing to buy. So the administration had a problem. And they floundered. I don't know if you noticed, I was obviously glued to everything over the weekend. And there was a real lack of any kind of statement from any but the most MAGA Republicans. There were some real deep MAGA who were out there going, yeah, these people deserved it, or he deserved it, or whatever. But a lot of Americans or Republicans who were not MAGA, and they were still, Republicans and still going along with Trump and all that, but they were not MAGA, and they kept their mouths shut. Last night, today is Monday, on Sunday night, Donald Trump put out a statement in which, or it was a social media post, his account put out a social media post in which he tried to blame the Democrats for the killing, in which he said, the whole reason we're there in Minnesota is because the Democrats don't have control of what's happening in that state, and they refuse to cooperate with us. They need to cooperate with us. If they would just cooperate with us, all the bad stuff would go away. Well, by today, it appeared that that's what MAGAs were going to coalesce around. That so long as the Democrats at the local and the state levels weren't cooperating with Trump, weren't doing what he said, that's why there was a problem, which is, just deeply problematic on any number of, you don't make things go away by breaking the law, right? So, but this was their narrative, that if you could just get the Democrats to cooperate, then there wouldn't be any problem, which, by the way, is also abusive language. I wouldn't hit you if you didn't deserve it, right? If you would only do what I say, right? But so the language that Trump was using in that, and the language that so many MAGAs have been using around the issues of the violence in Minnesota right now, was pretty clearly echoing the idea that Trump should call out the Insurrection Act, or should invoke the Insurrection Act to be able to use troops against the American people. That is to say, well, I have to use troops because the state and local authorities are not following the law. And it seemed like that was pretty clear. And one of the things that jumps out is that yesterday, I think it was, Steve Bannon, who is a MAGA supporter and sometime Trump advisor, was out there saying to outlets like the Wall Street Journal, he should invoke the Insurrection Act because this is all the fault of the Democrats who aren't doing what Trump says. And crucially, people like Bannon added in there that there is an invasion and that Trump must get the troops out to stop this invasion and the people who are supporting it. Now, that, as I said the other day, is language that comes from a dystopian novel from the 1970s that argues that immigration to what it considers Western civilization countries is literally an invasion that is going to destroy civilization in those countries. And as I said on whatever day it was, Sunday or Saturday, that idea maps directly over the idea that there are communists coming to take over American society, which is from earlier in the 20th century. And that itself maps over other hysterias in the United States that in the 1830s, 1840s, it's the Catholics. If you get all these different, in the late 19th century, it's the immigrants from the countries that at the time were not considered white, but are now, the Italians, the Poles, and so on. I mean, this is like just like a meme, right? A stereotypical fear in the United States. But the reason I mention that is because the language that is currently surrounding the cooperation of people who live in Minnesota with each other, this real outpouring of community support, feeding people, protecting people, making sure people are warm, making sure they have rent money, all of that, and handing out the hot chocolate and the donuts, and having makeshift meeting places and all that, organizing over social apps, all of that, which is very clearly a spontaneous reigniting of the networks that were put in place in 2020 around the protests around George Floyd, who's also killed in that area. That's obviously very, very organic. It's how a community works. It's how a small town works. It's how a city works when it's got these networks in place. But a lot of MAGA are beginning to insist that those people organizing like that in Minnesota are paid organizers and paid people who are deliberately bringing in this invasion, which, I mean, I can't go into this here, but boy, as an intellectual exercise, That's a really interesting leap, let me tell you. But I want to throw that out there because I think that you're seeing sort of this calcification of a mega idea that is on the part of us who are trying to honor American democracy, support the rule of law, protect our immigrant neighbors, do all the things that really truly has made America great, that somehow we are a paid army that they need to go to war against. And they really expected that Trump was going to go into that war with them, that he was going to invoke the Insurrection Act. This is something White House Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller has called for again and again and again, that he was going to bring out the troops, and the troops were going to destroy the enemy. And the enemy, of course, were immigrants, were Black and brown people, were Democrats, were all the people that they want to see purged from American society. But if that's one of the stories here, the other story is what I have identified there as this extraordinary outpouring of community feeling in Minnesota, but also around the country where, in Boston, and I'm not going to remember what the chant was, something like, "We're not afraid, Minnesota has shown us the way." That's not a direct quote, but there is this real sense of the American people, of we the people, standing up for each other. I mean, not standing up, not, taking a giant flag and, marching to the Capitol, but rather saying what America is us. And what we are is protecting kids and, sharing hot chocolate and making sure that you're not going to shoot our neighbors who are the good guys, the guys who are the ICU nurses. And that story is an incredibly powerful story. I would argue that it is the true story of America. But in this moment, what we can see is that it has the Trump administration on the run, because members of that administration are having to respond to Republican electeds, people in elected office, who are freaking out. And they are freaking out because they know that the American people have turned against not just Trump's handling of the economy, not just his handling of foreign policy, not just all those things that the polls show they have turned against, but also his handling of immigration, and crucially, the idea that he is wielding an American state that is willing to kill people, even white men with a concealed carry permit. That sense of, we are in real trouble, because, I don't know about you, but I don't know anybody who has actually been able to get a phone call through to a Republican elected since Saturday, because all the phone lines or all the voicemails and so on are full. So keep those calls coming, and I will go into that in a little more in a bit. But they know, they get this, they see this. And where you can really see this happening is that this morning, one of the guys who was a front runner for the Minnesota governor's nomination for the Republican Party dropped out of the race. He dropped out of the race because he said, "I cannot support the National Republicans' stated retribution on the citizens of our state, nor can I count myself a member of a party that would do so." Remember, this is a guy running for governor as a Republican. "Operation Metro Surge has expanded far beyond its stated focus on true public safety threats." And again, this is an off-ramp for a lot of people who said, "I want Trump to throw out the criminals," because they believed the lie that the Democratic administrations weren't doing that. In fact, the Democratic administrations of Biden and Obama had quite high deportation rates because they started with the criminals, not the people who had. It's not a felony to be an undocumented immigrant. They actually went for criminals, and it's much easier to get rid of a criminal than it is to get rid of somebody who's been here 30 years and is a member of a community and might have a parking ticket, but nothing else. So a lot of people jumped on board that because they believed that lie. But this gives a lot of them an off ramp. to say, well, this is not what I signed up for. If this guy is jumping, they can too. He went on to say, United States citizens, particularly those of color, live in fear. United States citizens are carrying papers to prove their citizenship. That's wrong. And then he went on to say, I am, above all else, a pragmatist. The reality is that the National Republicans have made it nearly impossible for a Republican to win a statewide election in Minnesota. And folks, that is writing on the wall in neon lights. That is a leading Republican in the state of Minnesota saying, Donald Trump has killed the Republican Party in the state of Minnesota. Where, by the way, they portray Minnesota often as a blue state, but it's not. It's a Midwestern, deeply purple state, and it's surrounded by states that voted for Trump in several of the last elections. So this is him coming forward and saying, there's no way I can win this election. And he is not the only one that are concerned. You're seeing a number of senators, a number of Republican senators backing away from Trump and saying, we need an investigation of this. Now, that's not them condemning him. That is them, though, beginning to put distance between him and themselves. And one of the things that showed up over the weekend, and I read a lot of people who kind of have inside knowledge, but it's not something I would ever put in print, because it's rumors kind of stuff. There was a chat going on this weekend about how Republican senators especially are very nervous about coming out at this point and supporting Trump because they don't know what's coming next. And by the way, this is something that people like me have been saying since, honest to God, 2016. That the man is a loose cannon, and if you sign on to him, you do not know what you will be excusing next. And here, of course, we have yet another killing in which the administration has led to the death. The administration's policies have led to the death of an American citizen. So that pressure of people like you and me on our electeds, especially on elected Republicans, have done a number of things. First of all, the 7 Democrats who were a bit squishy on whether or not they were going to continue to fund the Department of Homeland Security came out. Most of them have come out, maybe all. I've only seen a couple of them said, oopsie poopsie, we didn't mean it. We are, of course, going to vote against this. And I will tell you that one of the reasons that those 7, I think, didn't really particularly care about funding it this time around is that in the Republicans' bill of July 2024, the one they call One Big Beautiful Bill Act, they put huge sums of money into DHS, including into Immigration and Customs Enforcement and into Customs and Border Protection, which is the umbrella organization that Border Patrol, not Customs and Border Patrol, but Border Patrol is under. So they're actually fully funded. I mean, gazillions of dollars. That's not the official term, but really a ton of money until September 30th of 2029. So some of the Democrats were like, this isn't even a messaging bill because it's like throwing water into, it's throwing raindrops into a bucket of water. It doesn't matter what we've done here. But they have backed off on that. So that's one of the things that has happened there. But you're seeing that, but you're also seeing that Trump this morning came out and said that he was going to poll, or at least today, I'm not sure what timing everything dropped, that he was going to pull Greg Bovino from Minneapolis. That Greg Bovino is the Border Patrol guy who's really been pushing the violence. It seems as if he's really been focusing on trying to get sort of videos. He's the guy who had the Black Hawk helicopter and the people rappelling from it down into the apartment complex in Chicago. He's really been all about sort of portraying this idea of power and really escalating the violence of his agents. And this is the agency that's having really real trouble with the people that they're pulling on board and so on. So Trump said he was, I'm sorry, he didn't say this morning he was going to pull Bovino. He said that he was going to send Tom Homan in there. And Tom Homan, mind you, is no prize. He's the guy who has been accused credibly, and under the Biden administration, there was an investigation and a case proceeding against him for accepting $50,000 in a kava bag in exchange for the promise of steering federal contracts toward the person handing him the dollars. So he's been accused of that. The Trump administration dropped that lawsuit. He has been called a border czar. In fact, his only role is that he is an advisor to the president. And as I say, he's no prize at all, but he has been at odds with Kristi Noem, her advisor, Corey Lewandowski, and Greg Bovino for a long time now, because he believes in the institutions of ICE and Border Patrol, really Border Protection, which, as I say, is the next level up, because he cares about those institutions and he thinks they're ruining them. So sending him in at first was, as somebody said, a sign that Trump is sort of crying uncle and I want a way out of this. And by the end of Monday, the news had come down that Bovino and some of his agents were leaving Minnesota. And crucially, Trump went on Monday to post a number of statements about conversations that he had had with Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and with Minneapolis Mayor Jeffrey, I think it is, Fry. Let me check to make sure about that. Jacob Fry. I'm sorry, not Jeffrey, Jacob Fry. So the reason that is significant, first of all, is that after essentially assuring MAGA voters that Tim Walz was going to prison for fraud, which has been Trump's big thing and MAGA's big thing for the last month or so, all of a sudden, Trump is putting on social media that he had, let me see if I pulled some of it. Let me see here. He said that he had had a good conversation with Governor Walz, and that they appeared to agree on things. They seemed to have a good idea about what was going forward, what was going to go on forward, and they'd be working together, and they seemed to be on the same wavelength, and everything seemed like it was going in a good direction, which is just jaw-dropping if you think about what a backing down that is on Trump's side. And then he went on to say that he had had a conversation with Jacob Fry and lots of progress is being made, and this looked great too. To which Jacob Fry responded that he told Trump how important immigrants were to Minnesota and how in Minneapolis and how important they were, and that they would not cooperate with the police would not cooperate with federal immigration laws. They don't have to, by the way. There is a wall there. They can, but they don't have to. And that they, he was not going to do anything unconstitutional. And here's Trump going, this is great. We're all getting along now. And that is interesting for a lot of reasons. First of all, because Trump just hung MAGA out to dry. Again, after saying for a month, Tim Walz is a corrupt, whatever. All of a sudden now he's saying, I had a call. It was great. He seems, it seemed like it went really well. And I wish I could find you some of these lines from it. Let me see if I can find them. No, they're not here. And then he turned, oh, here we go. He says, Governor Tim Walz called me with a request to work together with respect to Minnesota. It was a very good call. And we actually seem to be on a similar wavelength. I told Governor Walz that I would have Tim Homan call him, and that what we're looking for are any and all criminals they have in their possession. The governor very respectfully understood that, and I will be speaking to him in the near future. And then he went on to say, both Governor Walz and I want to make it better. And again, you can tell I'm sort of like, what the heck just happened here? But what happened here is that Trump and his allies faced significant pushback from the American people from the American people saying, we ain't never voting for you again, ever. If you keep pulling this crap. And, Trump's on his way out. He doesn't, I mean, there's a story today in which, he told somebody he's not going to dye his hair anymore. And because he thinks he's going to be dead in 10 years. There is definitely a sense that he doesn't really care what's happening going forward. But senators and representatives and people live in the states care deeply. And this is, again, one of the things that led the Indiana senators to reject the gerrymander demands from the Trump administration, because they looked at this situation and said, we don't want any part of that. Because when you're not here any longer, we're going to have to answer to our constituents who are out there in the halls right now screaming at us about how they don't want us to gerrymander the state of Indiana. And interestingly enough, I know this is a little bit of a rabbit hole, but interestingly enough, one of those senators who said he would not be running for re-election has changed his mind. Standing against Trump has turned out, in his mind anyway, to be a good thing, not a bad thing, as far as attracting votes. So what you're seeing here is an administration that is, at the international level, in real trouble, of course, because every time Trump pulls something like he pulled at Davos less than a week ago, the stock market starts to crash. So he backs off on that. And then you have here in the United States a significant movement that is pushing back against him. And it has forced him to throw at least one member of his administration under the bus. But there are certainly signs that Kristi Noem might be next. There is an article against her in a couple of very prominent pro-administration papers suggesting they're softening the way to underbus her. So where I want to leave this today is that for so long, so many people have said to me, and to others, I'm only one person. What good can I do? What do you mean it matters to call my senators? We don't have any effect here. Nothing is going to change. This is proof that that's not the case. That what is happening in this country, and for the most heart-wrenching reasons, the loss of our best people to thugs, is never okay. And unfortunately, that's often the way the world is, because they're the people in the front lines doing the right thing. But that has created a moment in which Americans are remembering who we are. That we're not people who hunt down 5-year-olds. We're not people who put people in cages. Now, just to be clear, those things are happening. I'm not denying those are happening. And I'm certainly not denying that there is a strand in our history of that. But there has always been a stronger strand of our history in which decent people stand up and they say, hey, you just got shoved to the ground. Can I help you stand up? Or they say, are you marching tomorrow? I've got a staple gun for us to create signs. Or they say, damn, it's cold here. How would you like a cup of hot chocolate? Those small ties, those small community ties, that, as I say, just doing the next right thing, didn't seem like very much to people a year ago. But now you're watching what happens when a whole bunch of people do just something little, but it's enough to turn a bunch of drops into an ocean. And that ocean is right now what the Trump administration is contending with. A lot of people have made the comparison between the shooting of Alex Preddy and the people who came before him to what happened in Selma. And there is something to that having seen it, you cannot unsee it. And what I would urge you to do going forward is to take care of each other and to take care of yourself, but not to let this moment go, to keep the pressure up, because you can see that the administration is facing walls at every turn. And the person in charge of that administration is not in a position to make good decisions going forward. And the more of us who speak up and who articulate what we want for the future, I'm telling you, I don't just want Border Patrol to stop killing people. That's so much the bare minimum. I can't even tell you. But what do you think about Citizens United? What do you think about healthcare? What do you think about the media? What do you think about the big questions? Because we need to start putting those things in place and realize that that is what we are working toward as we stop the authoritarian takeover of the United States of America, because that ship has not yet sailed, either their success or their failure. That's the moment we're in right now. But the more of us who speak up, the more you're going to see Donald Trump going from, he's a crook and we're going to get rid of him, he's going to spend his time in prison, to, I had a really nice conversation today. And every time he does that, he loses more followers. So in this moment, again, keep calling, keep making your voices heard, keep making sure that we are reasserting those values that have for real made America great in the past and can make it great again in the future. Thank you for being here. I should be live again on Thursday. And of course, if something happens, I will step up again. I will give you one other little piece tonight. After everything tonight and everything that's happened for the last week, just before I came on, Trump's social media account posted that he's looking at tariffs again. So here we go. It's going to be a bumpy ride, but we're in it together, by God, and we're doing what we can for each other. And that, at the end of the day, is always what makes the difference. Thank you for being here.